Did you know that behind the government corridors and unassuming neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., exist black families that control media networks, billion-dollar funds, and entire voting blocs? You heard it right. Let's explore 10 richest families who are dominating the black wealth sphere in D.C. And trust me, the family sitting at number 1 will make you realize D.C. might be the most underrated black wealth capital in America. This topic was chosen after a poll win from viewers, so if you want a specific topic covered, comment below. Let's begin. Number 10. Kwame Onwuachi and family. Not many people realize what to do with attention before it vanishes, and that's the real genius. The Onwuachi family knew exactly how to capitalize on their share of attention. The leader of the pack, Kwame Onwuachi, came up through elite kitchens, sharpened his craft under intense pressure, and then stepped into the reality TV spotlight early enough to understand its limits. For him, fame is never an asset, it's actually raw material. What matters is how quickly you refine it into something that pays when the cameras move on. So instead of chaining himself to the notoriously brutal margins of traditional restaurant ownership, Onwuachi built a portfolio that treats culture as intellectual property. His personal enterprise value is widely estimated in the mid to high 7 figures, with upside pushing into the low 8 figures when all revenue streams are tallied. That includes equity participation in restaurant concepts structured around profit sharing rather than outright ownership, royalties from notes from a young black chef, which crossed 100,000 copies sold, and recurring television contracts with networks like Food Network and major streaming platforms. These aren't one-off appearance checks. They're long-tail brand deals that continue paying because his story remains relevant. Then there's the speaking circuit. Corporate keynotes, university talks, private brand events, often commanding $25,000 to $75,000 per engagement. That's not celebrity fluff. That's institutional validation. Organizations aren't paying for recipes. They're paying for narrative authority. Washington, D.C. played a very specific role in this ecosystem. His restaurant Kith/Kin at the Wharf wasn't merely a dining room. It was a social switchboard. Situated inside a luxury hotel development, it drew diplomats, senior Hill staffers, lobbyists, embassy guests, and international delegations. In D.C., that audience matters. It's where cultural credibility quietly converts into long-term relationships. More importantly, the city allowed Onwuachi to amplify visibility without locking capital into heavy real estate exposure. D.C. functioned less as a base of operations and more as a brand accelerant, proximity to power, without the overhead that slows creative entrepreneurs down. From a business mechanics standpoint, this model is intentionally lean. High margins come from IP, not infrastructure. Fixed costs stay lower than multi-location restaurant groups burdened by leases, staffing bloat, and renovation debt. The trade-off is volatility. Income remains tied to reputation, public sentiment, and media cycles. When momentum is hot, it scales fast. When attention shifts, it demands reinvention. And that's the point. Onwuachi represents a distinctly modern D.C. wealth lane. Culture first, capital second, with the flexibility to pivot before the spotlight fades. But cultural clout only gets you through the door. The next family figured out how to stay inside the room by mastering the paperwork, the permits, and the politics. Number 9. The Lynch family. If Washington, D.C. were a game board, J.R. Lynch would be playing the long version, the one with zoning maps, committee meetings, and timelines that test your patience. While flashy developers chase quick flips, Lynch built his fortune by leaning into the city's complexity and learning how to make bureaucracy work for him instead of against him. Today, his firm is valued north of $100 million, with more than $500 million in assets under development or management. But that number didn't appear overnight. It's the result of understanding how D.C. actually moves, slowly, politically, and with a heavy emphasis on who knows how to navigate public sector systems. The revenue structure is layered and disciplined. Development fees usually land between 3 and 5% per project. Asset management fees provide steady recurring income once buildings stabilize. The real upside comes from long-term equity positions that mature as neighborhoods evolve. Deals are often built using a stack that blends DC Housing Authority financing, federal tax credits, and private debt, a structure that scares off less patient players. Geographically, Lynch's footprint clusters along the Green Line. These are areas where transit access, zoning flexibility, and demographic shifts intersect. But the real advantage isn't geography, it's fluency. His team understands zoning variances, community benefit agreements, and the political cadence of approvals that can stall outside developers for years. Mixed-income housing plays a deliberate role in the strategy. It stabilizes returns while offering political insulation. Affordability commitments don't weaken deals here. They protect them. When gentrification debates flare up, Lynch's projects tend to survive because they were built with those conversations in mind from day one. But once the buildings go up, someone has to decide who gets the money to move in. Which brings us to a bank that's been pulling those strings for nearly a century. Number 8. The Boyle-Mitchell Family Industrial Bank. Founded in 1934, Industrial Bank became a financial lifeline when redlining made capital a locked door for black businesses across Washington. And behind it was a family whose influence in D.C. still runs deep. Today, the Boyle-Mitchell family oversees an institution with assets estimated between $650 and $750 million, deposits exceeding $600 million, and annual revenues hovering between $40 and $60 million. For a community bank, those are serious numbers, and the performance backs it up. A return on assets around 1.2% puts Industrial Bank in strong territory for its category. The loan portfolio tells you exactly what kind of institution this is. Roughly 45% flows into small business lending. Around 40% supports mortgages. The remainder goes to churches, nonprofits, and community institutions, the backbone of DC's black economy. These aren't speculative bets. They're relationship-driven decisions built on decades of trust. That trust is the real asset here. Relationships stretch across generations. Pastors who've banked there their entire careers, funeral home operators financing expansions, medical practices securing long-term stability, trade contractors cycling deposits and credit through the same institution year after year. In a city where political winds change fast, this kind of loyalty creates resilience. Industrial Bank's endurance comes from restraint, conservative balance sheet management, measured growth, lending that values reputation and community standing alongside credit scores. It's not flashy, but it compounds. In DC's black wealth ecosystem, Industrial Bank plays the long game. It doesn't just move money. It decides where momentum can actually take root. And now that the capital's flowing, the next family figured out how to turn ownership itself into generational leverage, on a scale that reshaped entire corridors. Number 7. Donahue, Don Peebles and Family. If Washington, D.C. had a rulebook for real estate, Don Peebles would certainly be one of the authors. Long before he became a national name in luxury development, Peebles was a young operator navigating DC's political maze during the 1980s, when city hall relationships mattered just as much as financing spreadsheets. His first real momentum came during the Marion Barry era, when Peebles won key tax assessment and development contracts that many larger firms ignored or underestimated. Those early wins did more than generate revenue. They gave him proximity to how DC actually works. The informal alliances, the timing of approvals, the quiet negotiations that happen long before a shovel touches dirt. That knowledge became his real seed capital. Today, the Peebles Corporation controls or has developed projects collectively valued in the billions of dollars, spanning Washington, D.C., New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. His portfolio leans heavily toward luxury condominiums, high-end hotels, and mixed-use towers, the kind of projects that demand coordination with city agencies, pension funds, labor unions, and community groups all at once. D.C. remains the proving ground. His projects here established a reputation for closing complex public-private deals where zoning approvals, tax incentives, and neighborhood buy-in all need to line up. Once that credibility solidified, Peebles exported the model nationally, applying DC political discipline to faster-moving markets. What adds texture to his story is how openly he talks about race and access in real estate. Peebles regularly points out how few billion-dollar developments are led by black firms, even while competing head-to-head for those same deals. That candor draws attention, and sometimes controversy, but it also reinforces his brand as someone who understands both the system and its blind spots. There's a reason his name keeps appearing in politically sensitive developments. He learned early that in Washington, concrete waits patiently until politics finish their conversation. Peebles became very good at knowing when that conversation was over. Next up, we have a family that teaches how to be recognizable before you even enter the room. Number 6. Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson's DC footprint feels subtle until you zoom out and realize how much institutional trust follows him wherever he goes. His estimated $1.5 billion net worth wasn't built on flashy bets or viral moments. It grew through ownership stakes designed to generate steady cash flow while keeping leverage low and credibility high. The centerpiece is Equitrust Life Insurance, an annuity-driven business whose assets grew from $16 billion to over $27 billion under his ownership group. That growth matters because annuities create predictable income, the kind institutional investors love, and they provide a capital base that doesn't panic during downturns. Sports ownership adds another layer. Stakes in the NFL, MLB, and WNBA bring dividend income and asset appreciation, but more importantly, they embed Magic inside elite ownership circles. These relationships unlock deal flow that rarely reaches the open market. DC enters the picture through his ownership stake in the Washington Commanders, placing him directly inside conversations about stadium redevelopment, regional zoning approvals, and billion-dollar infrastructure negotiations. In a city where perception can slow or accelerate projects, Magic's reputation reduces friction. Partners trust the brand. Politicians know the name. Capital moves faster. What's interesting here is how celebrity functions economically. Magic doesn't need to shout or posture. His presence lowers the cost of capital simply by existing in the room. Institutional partners assume stability, discipline, and long-term thinking, often correctly. Unlike speculative developers, his model prioritizes durability. Cash flow assets first, appreciation second. Optics always considered, never abused. It's wealth designed to survive cycles rather than chase peaks. But visibility alone doesn't shape culture. Control over narrative does. And nobody in DC has mastered that conversion better than the next family. Number 5. The Obama family. The Obama family occupies a rare economic category in Washington, one that doesn't rely on factories or traditional corporations, yet quietly outperforms many of them. Their wealth engine runs on something far more elusive: intellectual property, trust, and convening power. And in a city like DC, those assets compound faster than concrete ever could. Let's start with the hard numbers because they are the true measure of what we're gauging in this list. Combined book advances for Barack and Michelle Obama reportedly exceeded $60 million, instantly placing them among the most commercially successful authors in American history. Add the higher ground production deal with Netflix, widely estimated between $50 and $100 million, and you begin to see how storytelling turned into scalable infrastructure. This wasn't a celebrity cash grab. It was vertical integration. Books feeding documentaries, documentaries reinforcing speeches, speeches strengthening legacy. Speaking of speeches, their appearance fees routinely reach $400,000 or more per event. And that's not because they entertain. It's because institutions pay for credibility. Universities, global summits, corporate leadership forums, these aren't stages chasing applause. They're rooms trying to anchor legitimacy. When the Obamas show up, the room gains weight. But Washington, D.C. remains the gravitational center of it all. Their home in Kalorama is more than a residential choice. It places them within walking distance, literally and symbolically, of embassies, foundations, think tanks, and the nonprofit elite. That proximity matters. Relationships in DC don't need to be announced. They operate quietly through invitations, boards, and off-the-record conversations that move capital and attention with remarkable efficiency. What makes this wealth model especially powerful is how it compounds without expansion. There are no additional locations to open, no inventory to manage, no staff scaling problems. Books feed speaking. Speaking feeds production deals. Media projects reinforce historical relevance. Relevance increases demand. And the loop tightens, again and again. Equally important is what the Obamas don't do. They don't overexpose the brand. Appearances are selective. Projects arrive spaced out. Scarcity, here, is a strategy, one that protects pricing power and public trust. In DC, where everyone is visible, restraint is often the loudest flex. Economically, this is convening power monetized at scale. When they host, people attend. When they endorse, capital listens. When they launch an initiative, partners line up not out of fandom, but alignment. But while presidencies end, platforms don't. And that leads us to a media institution that was built to outlast political cycles entirely. Number 4. The Johnson-Hughes BET dynasty. If Washington, D.C. had a Rosetta Stone for modern black wealth, BET would be etched right at the top. Not because of the music videos or red carpet moments, but because Robert L. Johnson and Sheila Johnson figured out, earlier than almost anyone else, how to convert cultural relevance into durable ownership. And then, how to exit at exactly the right moment. BET was launched in 1979, right here in DC, at a time when cable television was still a gamble and black audiences were treated like an afterthought. What made DC essential wasn't just geography, it was proximity to regulators. The FCC, cable negotiators. Policy conversations that quietly decided who got carriage and who didn't. BET didn't just broadcast culture, it learned how to navigate the machinery behind the broadcast industry. That institutional fluency paid off. As BET grew into a national platform, it wasn't chasing ad dollars blindly. It was securing access. By the time Viacom acquired BET in 2001 for $3 billion, Johnson wasn't emotionally attached to the channel. He understood something many founders don't. Exits aren't betrayals, they're leverage points. The real story starts after the sale. Johnson folded his proceeds into RLJ companies, quietly building a diversified empire spanning hospitality, private equity, banking, asset management, and real estate. Hotels don't trend on Twitter, but they compound beautifully. Meanwhile, Sheila Johnson built the Salamander Collection into a luxury hospitality brand catering to diplomats, corporate executives, and global travelers, the kind of clientele DC reliably produces. What's fascinating is how much public debate fixated on BET's cultural impact while the founders were steadily converting visibility into balance sheet strength. Culture was the ignition, assets were the engine, fame was temporary, ownership was permanent. In Washington, that distinction matters. Media influence fluctuates with taste. Real estate, private equity, and financial services don't. The Johnson-Hughes dynasty represents a specific DC lesson. If you're going to shape culture, make sure you eventually own something that survives it. But before cable television monetized culture at scale, radio was already shaping political conversations. And one woman turned a single DC frequency into a family stronghold. Number 3. Cathy Hughes and family. Cathy Hughes didn't start Urban One with venture capital or safety nets. She started it sleeping on the floor of a radio station. That detail isn't sentimental, it's structural. When Hughes acquired WOLAM in Washington, D.C. in the late 1970s, she was broke, determined, and deeply aware of what the station represented. Radio wasn't just entertainment in D.C., it was information. It was community glue. It was political oxygen. WOLAM became a space where Black Washington talked to itself, unfiltered, opinionated, sometimes chaotic, always engaged. Pastors, activists, candidates, and everyday residents tuned in because it felt real. And in DC, real conversations have consequences. That trust turned into leverage. Over decades, Hughes expanded WOL into Urban One, now the largest Black-owned urban media company in the country, generating over $500 million in annual revenue across radio, television, TV One, and digital platforms. Crucially, the Hughes family maintains over 80% voting control, an almost unheard-of level of internal authority in modern media. DC amplified everything. Political campaigns understood that if you wanted to reach Black voters, Urban One wasn't optional. Advertisers followed audiences. Policymakers paid attention because influence lived there. What often gets overlooked is the financial discipline behind the scenes. Urban One reportedly holds cash reserves approaching $200 million, giving the family flexibility that most media companies lack. They don't chase every trend. They wait, observe, and move deliberately. Critics accuse the company of sensationalism, but that criticism misses the point. Urban One mirrors its audience, layered, emotional, contradictory. That resonance is precisely why it works. By transitioning day-to-day leadership to her son, while retaining strategic influence, Hughes ensured continuity without stagnation. Power didn't evaporate, it matured. But still, even controlling the conversation isn't the same as owning the platforms themselves. And the next name on this list has made a career out of buying them whole. Number 2. Byron Allen. Byron Allen looks like an entertainer, but he thinks like a hostile bidder. That's the disconnect people never quite resolve. Allen started as a teenage comedian, telling jokes on national television, but somewhere along the way he grasped a deeper truth. Performing earns applause. Ownership earns leverage. Today, Allen Media Group sits atop a multi-billion-dollar media portfolio, with Allen's personal net worth estimated between $735 million and $1 billion. His holdings include the Weather Channel, purchased for roughly $300 million, dozens of local broadcast stations, over 70 syndicated TV shows, and multiple cable networks quietly pulling in advertising revenue. DC matters here because Allen understands how power consumes information. His DC area stations land in federal offices, hotels, embassies, and political households. His content isn't provocative by design, it's present. And presence in Washington is influence. What truly separates Allen is his ambition. He's made multi-billion-dollar bids for companies like Tenya, pursued Paramount assets, and even explored buying the Washington Commanders. These aren't vanity plays. They're attempts to consolidate media ownership in a way that reshapes who controls narratives nationally. Critics worry about debt. Industry insiders question timing. Allen shrugs and keeps bidding. He's also used litigation strategically, challenging discriminatory advertising practices and forcing regulators and corporations into uncomfortable conversations. In DC, where civil rights law and regulatory power live side by side, that approach resonates. Now, even the billion-dollar media empires still operate inside systems. But the final name on this list? They operate at the level where systems themselves get influenced. Number 1. Robert F. Smith and Family. Robert F. Smith doesn't need to raise his voice in Washington because he has enough capital to do the talking for him. With an estimated $10.8 billion net worth, Smith is the richest Black individual connected to DC's power ecosystem, not just because he runs a local business, but also because his influence scales globally. Through Vista Equity Partners, Smith oversees tens of billions in assets, specializing in enterprise software that underpins modern institutions. Vista doesn't invest in flashy consumer apps. It buys the invisible infrastructure: compliance systems, payment platforms, data architecture. The software governments, hospitals, banks, and corporations cannot function without. That kind of ownership quietly embeds you into policy conversations, whether you want to be there or not. Smith's DC footprint shows up through philanthropy, advocacy, and institutional partnerships. His investments in HBCUS, STEM education, and economic equity routinely intersect with congressional hearings, federal agencies, and think tanks shaping national policy. The 2019 moment when he wiped out the student debt of an entire Morehouse College graduating class wasn't just generosity. It was a cultural intervention. Overnight, Smith became a reference point in debates about student loans, racial wealth gaps, and corporate responsibility. There's complexity, too. Smith later entered a non-prosecution agreement related to tax issues, paying penalties and cooperating with authorities. That episode added tension to his public image, a reminder that navigating opaque financial systems cuts both ways. To put things in perspective, Smith doesn't react to policy shifts. His capital influences the environments in which policies are written. So, when Robert F. Smith moves, institutions recalibrate. And that's why, quietly and unmistakably, his household sits at number 1 in the list of richest black families associated with Washington, D.C. And these were the richest black families in Washington, D.C. Which story inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into the lives of rich, take a look at Black Status.